Thank you, Mayor. Excellent. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good evening everybody. And I have to say, I do feel more comfortable being in the city, addressing an audience here, than I do when I go to the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where in my end of term summing up the other week, there were about 500 of them that were booing, hissing and jeering, and my goodness me, I really did thoroughly enjoy myself. I made the point that ever since the French, and then the Dutch, and then the Irish said no in referendums, rather than regarding me as some sort of slightly cuddly eccentric tucked away in the corner, suddenly I've become the devil. And they've been throwing abuse at me. I've been told that I'm leading my group in the Parliament as Adolf Hitler led the National Socialists in the Reichstag. I've been told by Danny Cohn-Bendit, anyone remember him? Yeah, well, he's now, of course, a member of the establishment. And Danny Cohn-Bendit says that I am mentally ill because I oppose the Lisbon Treaty. I've been told by the leader of the Liberal group, one Graham Watson, that my behaviour is akin to that of an English football hooligan. I can live with the English, I can live with the hooligan, but not the football. And from the chap who was the leader of the Labour MEPs for 3 or 4 years, a chap called Gary Titley, I'm sure he's a household name to all of you, and Gary Titley told the Parliament that I was a paranoid reactionary, living on the fringes of society. So that's how welcome I am in the European Parliament. I thought I'd respond with what I thought was a fairly English insult, and so I told them I thought they were a complete shower. Which I think was about right. But of course I feel comfortable in the city because this is very much the place that my family is from. My grandfather worked in the city before the First World War and for many years after that. My father still is a stockbroker in the city. Sadly, he's not here tonight. He himself is speaking at an event somewhere else, and he's probably just about the last person that you'll see now walking around the streets of the city with a bowler hat, a carnation and a monocle. It really is proper stuff when you see it. But I spent 20 years in the city. I mean, most of it was at lunch, it has to be said. But occasionally in the mornings I was seen buying and selling a few lots of copper or aluminium on the London Metal Exchange, and it is especially about the City of London that I want to speak tonight. Because make absolutely no mistake about it, what happens here in this square mile, and of course it's moved a bit because we've got Canary Wharf and we've got the hedge fund industry down at St James's, but it is the financial services industry that is the backbone of the British economy. There's no question about it. It is our most successful product, and it has been when you think about it for centuries. Yes, of course we can manufacture things occasionally, but really this country has always been a merchant trading nation. We've been that for many centuries. And whilst we used to move things around the world using a merchant navy, well, we now tend to use text messages, phone conversations or computer screens. But the principles remain the same. And one of the great things about the city that struck me from my very first days here as a very nervous 18-year-old was the sheer international nature of the city. Yes, of course we do domestic business. Yes, of course we do French and German business. But only 1/5 of the city's overseas trade is with countries that are member states of the European Union. 80% of the city's overseas trade is with the rest of the world. And it was when I first heard in the 1980s about this European single market that I began to think to myself, well, why do we need to be inextricably linked economically and politically to a European single market when we are, and we always have been, a global trading nation? And I would put it to you, that in the age of globalisation through which we're living, where it is very likely that the European Union's share of global gross domestic product is likely to halve over the next 10 years, that the reasons now for not being inextricably linked economically and politically with the European Union are now stronger than they have ever been, and that if the city is to thrive, is to continue to be the world's premier financial centre. It has to be flexible, it has to be adaptable, but above all, it has to be global. Now, of course, I'm conscious, looking around the room and seeing brokers and bankers here, that you are, of course, all dreadful people. Because there can be no question, can there, that it is because of you, it is because of your greed, that all these terrible things are happening in the world. There is nobody in government that is to blame for any of this, and the regulator's role in it all has been entirely faultless. Well, actually, if you think about it, that's the message, isn't it, that the politicians have been selling, and they've actually been selling that message rather successfully. Which is why, when Gordon Brown, our great Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, came to Strasbourg the other day, and I was given the opportunity for 3 minutes to address it. And I approached it in my normal, thoughtful, quiet, modest and positive way. And I pointed out to Gordon Brown that this reputation that he'd had for years of economic competence wasn't one that, in my view, he'd ever earned. Because one of the first acts that Gordon Brown did as Chancellor of the Exchequer was to sell 400 metric tons of Britain's gold reserves. And do you remember how he did it? He announced that there would be 17 gold auctions, and he announced the dates upon which he'd sell the metal and how much he'd sell. And I made the point to our Prime Minister in my little contribution that even the average A-level economics student, even in these educationally devalued times, would not make such a basic economic error. So I felt since 1999 that Brown wasn't competent in any way at all. And the biggest mistake that was made here was to take away from the Bank of England its supervisory and its regulatory role. Do you know, I remember that in the 80s, working on the LME and being quite a keen golfer, that every year we had a golf weekend, London Metal Exchange and Bank of England. And we'd go down to Rye, and we'd have dinner, and the odd drink, here or there, and we could just about stand up on the first tee the next morning, and we'd then play 36 holes of golf with the Bank of England. The Bank of England were out doing this every weekend. They were doing it with the Metal Exchange. They were doing it with the Baltic Exchange. They were doing it with the Stock Exchange. They were doing it with the bullion dealers. They were doing it with the foreign exchange dealers. The Bank of England knew everybody in the city on a personal level, and the Bank of England had real expertise on the markets. And what Gordon Brown did was to create the illusion that the Bank of England was being given independence and somehow more power by allowing the Monetary Policy Committee to set interest rates, when in reality, what he did was to take away from them their real power and their real ability to bring stability within the banking system. It was something over which the recently departed Eddie George, and what a great man he was in so many ways, Eddie George very nearly resigned from the Bank of England in 1997 over that. So, however dreadful it may appear that you are, I don't believe that it is all your fault. I think that the regulators and I think that the politicians have made some horrendous errors in financial markets over the last 10 years, and not just here. You know, I also have the feeling that Alan Greenspan, when in 1998-9 he got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, didn't necessarily think through exactly what he was doing. I have to say, when I worked for Credit Lyonnais, or Debit Lyonnais as it really was when I was there, certainly my P&L after lunch wasn't too rosy, but anyway, you know, when I worked there, I did find Glass-Steagall frustrating, because it was difficult, if you were designated as a retail bank, to go out and get commercial business in America. But it did, I think, act as quite a good safeguard. So I have felt for all these years that Brown was a gross incompetent, and I'm now absolutely certain of it. And it's a bit rich, isn't it? It's a bit rich for a political class in Westminster to accuse other people of being self-serving and greedy. I know that when we used to put our expense accounts in, when I worked at Drexel Burnham Lambert, it was called Jackanory time, but I do remember that. But I don't remember anybody at Drexel when I was there having their moat cleared. or moles taken from their lawn, or some of those video channels that some of you here probably subscribe to in your own private time. But I mean, the point is, these are the people that are pointing the finger, that are blaming everybody. I think the one good thing that has come out of the last week is I think the average Joe Soap in this country has seen just how greedy, self-serving and frankly hopeless virtually our entire political class in Westminster are. Now there may be one or two of you sitting here who think I'm wrong, that somehow this nice, call me Dave, Cameron will come to power next year and he'll be really good news for the City of London. He'll be really good news for our financial services industry because he'll understand far more about it than clearly Gordon, who obviously is a moron.